Some nights, I would stand in the kitchen long after dinner was over, my hand still holding the spoon, the soup already cold. My 3 children were asleep in the next room. The house was quiet. And in that silence, one thought kept rising inside me. What if I just disappeared? Not because I didn't love my children, not because I truly wanted to die, but because I had been living like this for so long that every morning felt like waking up underwater, fighting for one more breath. 12 years of marriage, 3 children, and all that time, I still never knew what it felt like to be truly loved by my husband. Act 2. The Setup. When I married him, I told myself what so many women are taught to believe. Be patient, endure a little, stay quiet, and the family will stay whole. He had a stable job, he wore a uniform, people respected him. I, on the other hand, finished school but never found a solid career. Then I had children, one after another, and my life slowly disappeared into diapers, school fees, grocery bills, sleepless nights, and exhaustion. He never truly shared the financial burden with me. He gave money only when he felt like it. If the kids needed tuition, I had to remind him. If I got sick, I still had to get up, cook, clean, and care for everyone. Because if I rested, he would complain as if I had failed him. The hardest part wasn't being poor. The hardest part was living beside a man who was physically there, but emotionally nowhere near me. Then, while I was pregnant with our second child, he cheated on me. I knew, I hurt, and I stayed silent. I swallowed everything until 1 month after giving birth, when I finally exposed the truth. At first, he denied it. Then he admitted it. My family told me to let it go. Think about the children. Think about the marriage. Think about what people would say. And I listened. Partly because of the kids, partly because back then, I still loved him. I thought if I forgave him, the wound would eventually close. But some wounds don't heal when you bury them. They rot in the dark. Act 3. The Fall. Years passed, and he stayed the same. Cold, controlling, cheap with money, heavy with anger. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make the whole house feel smaller. And then, I made my own mistake. After years of feeling invisible in my own marriage, I met another man. He wasn't some grand love story. He didn't promise me a new life. He simply asked if I had eaten, told me to wear a jacket when it was cold, listened when I spoke, without irritation, without judgment. That was all. And somehow, that small kindness felt like sunlight to someone who had been living in the dark. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was crossing a line. And I was already trying to pull away, but before I could end it completely, my husband found out. That was the first time I ever saw him cry. The first time I saw him beg. The first time I heard him say he would change. And for a while, he did. For 6 months, it felt like I had my husband back. Or maybe, it felt like I was finally meeting the man I had waited 12 years for. He was gentler, more attentive, more loving. For 6 short months, I believed we might actually rebuild something real. But then it ended. And when it ended, it came back worse than before. He returned to being the same man, only now he had a weapon. My mistake. He brought it up whenever he was angry. He used it to humiliate me, to insult me, to tear me down again and again. Some wounds don't bruise the skin. They split open your dignity. I worked during the day for a small paycheck. At night, I came home to cook, clean, care for the kids, stay up with the baby, and keep going on almost no sleep. He didn't help. He didn't provide enough. Sometimes I didn't even have money for medicine. I got sick and avoided the doctor because I simply couldn't afford to go. And every few days, or every few months, the same rage returned, the same insults, the same shame, the same pain. There were nights after he fell asleep that I sat alone on the floor, hearing my children breathe in the next room, and thought, how much longer can I live like this? If I leave, how will I survive? If I stay, what will be left of me? I was trapped between guilt, fear, motherhood, and survival. And little by little, I was disappearing anyway. One night, my youngest child had a fever. I held that little body close to my chest near the window, trying to help them breathe easier. Their forehead was burning. Their tiny hand clung to my shirt. And in that moment, something inside me became painfully clear. I am not afraid of hardship. What I am afraid of is my children growing up believing that this is what marriage looks like, that love means endurance, that being a wife means being humiliated, that motherhood means silent suffering, that staying broken is somehow noble. No, that night, I was not brave enough to change my entire life, but I was clear enough to understand one thing. I had to start saving myself. Not through more promises, not through more forgiveness, not through more silence, but by finally telling myself the truth. A marriage filled with fear, humiliation, and emotional starvation is not something holy you protect at all costs. Sometimes, it is the very thing destroying you. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would stay, leave, fight, or fall apart first. But I knew this. I had to live. For my children, for the woman I used to be, and for the woman I still hoped I could become. Because one day, I wanted to look back and no longer see a woman standing alone in a dark kitchen, praying to disappear. I wanted to see a woman who finally chose to stay alive.